Attorney General Pam Bondi has spent the last few hours fielding questions from members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. It's been a tense and confrontational hearing between Bondi and Democratic senators so far. CBS News correspondent Chanel Call has been listening in. Chanel, thank you so much for joining us today. Why is this hearing happening and what have you heard so far?
Isn't the first lie ever told before the United States Senate, and it certainly won't be the last. But what Attorney General Pam Bondi said before the members of the Senate Judiciary Committee this afternoon may very well go down as one of the most brazen, most shameless, most verifiably false statements ever uttered in that setting. Quote, "The two-tiered system of justice is over. In fact, if Bondi's on their record testimony today served to prove anything out in public, anything at all, it is that a two-tiered system of justice has very much been operationalized, is the new reality in the United States of America right now." Attorney General Pam Bondi walked into the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing under intense pressure, and that pressure only escalated as the session unfolded. This was not a routine oversight hearing. This was a confrontation that exposed deep fractures inside the Justice Department and raised serious constitutional alarms that may follow Bondi for the rest of her life. From the opening moments, it was clear that Democratic senators were not there to play nice. The questioning was sharp, relentless, and focused on one central theme: whether the Department of Justice under Bondi's leadership had crossed a constitutional line in pursuit of political objectives tied to Donald Trump.
Department of sort of going after people that are perceived to be enemies of President Donald Trump. Attorney General Pamela Bondi, who you see here today, facing some questions about a wide swath of topics, of issues, including her handling of the Epstein files, also
The hearing took place against a volatile backdrop coming just days after former FBI Director James Comey was indicted by a federal grand jury. That timing mattered because it reinforced growing accusations that the Justice Department was being weaponized against individuals perceived as enemies of Trump. Before going deeper, if you think Pam Bondi should be held accountable for her actions, hit subscribe, like this video, and share it with everyone who needs to hear the truth. Now, let's get back to what is actually happening.
Welcome back, everybody. Democratic members of the Senate Judiciary Committee want to know if President Trump has weaponized the Department of Justice to go after his political enemies, like former FBI Director James Comey. In the congressional hot seat today, you see her right there behind me. That's Attorney General Pam Bondi. Listen to this heated moment when Senator Richard Blumenthal asked about that Comey indictment.
Bondi was forced to answer for a wide range of controversies. Senators pressed her on the handling of the Epstein files, the opaque nature of certain client lists, the hiring of individuals with direct ties to January 6th, and the Trump administration's aggressive use of National Guard deployments in American cities. Each topic added weight to the moment, but none of them prepared observers for what happened next. During her testimony, Pam Bondi made an admission that stunned legal experts and immediately set off alarm bells across the legal community. She acknowledged engaging in actions that were not merely questionable, but unlawful. This was not a vague misstatement or an accidental slip of the tongue. This was a clear admission tied to official court filings. Bondi effectively conceded that she retroactively signed documents in an attempt to legitimize prosecutorial actions that were unconstitutional at the time they were carried out. That admission alone placed her in extraordinary legal jeopardy. The consequences are not theoretical. The charges that could stem from this conduct carry penalties severe enough to put a sitting attorney general behind bars for the rest of her life. Attorney General Pam Bondi has spent the last few hours fielding questions from members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. It's been a tense and confrontational hearing between Bondi and Democratic senators so far. CBS News correspondent Chanel Call has been listening in. Chanel, thank you so much for joining us today. Why is this hearing happening and what have you heard so far? Well, hey Muga, good to see you. So, this is an annual Justice Oversight Committee meeting. But it comes after former FBI Director James Comey was indicted by a federal grand jury. So, some Democratic lawmakers now accusing the Justice Department of sort of going after people that are perceived to be enemies of President Donald Trump. Attorney General Pamela Bondi, who you see here today, facing some questions about a wide swath of topics of issues, including her handling of the Epstein files, also the existence of that so-called client list.
The department has become President Trump's personal sword and shield to go after his ever-growing list of political enemies.
Bondi has endured a series of controversies in recent months, including the ongoing pressure to release the government's full investigation related to Jeffrey Epstein. Today, she fired back at Democrats.
She was also asked today, Mugo, about the Justice Department hiring January 6ers and the Trump administration's move to deploy National Guard troops to various cities across the country. Here's more on that, with Illinois Democratic Senator Dick Durbin and Attorney General Pam Bondi sort of clashing over this topic. To understand why this is so serious, it is necessary to break down exactly what Bondi admitted to doing. According to court documents dated the 10th of November 2025 and reported extensively by Law and Crime, Bondi authorized a prosecutor to pursue politically sensitive cases targeting Trump's political opponents. The problem was not the prosecutions themselves. The problem was that the prosecutor was never properly appointed under the United States Constitution. When this defect came to light, the indictments were suddenly at risk of collapsing in court. Rather than acknowledging the constitutional violation and correcting it through lawful means, Bondi attempted to solve the problem retroactively. She signed documents after the fact and backdated them to create the appearance that the prosecutor had been properly appointed from the beginning. This was not a technical error nor a paperwork mistake. This was an attempt to rewrite history to cover up a constitutional violation. The Appointments Clause of the Constitution is explicit. Certain federal officials must be appointed through specific processes involving presidential nomination and Senate confirmation, or through clearly defined alternatives for inferior officers. These requirements are not optional. They exist to prevent exactly the kind of unchecked power Bondi's actions represent. Legal experts across the ideological spectrum agree on one critical point: constitutional violations cannot be cured retroactively. If a prosecutor was not properly appointed at the time they acted, everything they did is legally void. No document signed later can change that reality. What makes Bondi's situation even worse is that the Department of Justice itself acknowledged the problem. In filings opposing her position, DOJ attorneys explicitly stated that her attempt to retroactively validate the appointment was unauthorized. That language is devastating. It demonstrates that the government recognized the constitutional defect and that Bondi acted anyway. That recognition transforms this from negligence into intent. Intent is the difference between administrative error and criminal liability. Bondi is not a novice. She is a lawyer. She is a former state attorney general. She understands constitutional law. She understands the Appointments Clause. Her decision to proceed despite that knowledge exposes her to some of the most serious federal charges imaginable. Among them is obstruction of justice. Backdating documents to conceal constitutional defects during active legal proceedings fits squarely within the definition of corruptly impeding the administration of justice. The law does not require dramatic gestures or overt threats. Paperwork manipulation designed to hide unlawful conduct is more than enough. There's also abuse of office. Using the power of the Attorney General to pursue politically motivated prosecutions while knowingly violating constitutional safeguards constitutes official oppression. Federal statute makes it a crime for government officials to knowingly violate constitutional protections while acting in their official capacity. If Bondi coordinated with others to push these prosecutions forward, despite knowing they were unconstitutional, that statute comes directly into play. Each of these charges carries substantial prison time. Obstruction alone can lead to sentences of up to 20 years per count. When multiple counts are stacked consecutively, the math becomes unavoidable. 5 counts of obstruction combined with multiple civil rights violations easily push total sentencing exposure into life imprisonment territory. Judges are allowed to consider aggravating factors during sentencing. One of the most significant aggravating factors recognized under federal guidelines is abuse of a position of trust. As Attorney General, Bondi was the highest law enforcement officer in the country. That does not shield her. It makes her conduct more blameworthy. There is also the issue of state-level exposure. Some of the alleged conduct, including falsification of official documents, could violate state laws. State charges cannot be erased by presidential pardon. Even if federal charges were somehow neutralized politically, state prosecutors would remain free to pursue their own cases. This is why legal analysts describe Bondi's position as uniquely dangerous. The usual escape hatches available to political figures may not apply. Politically, she has been controversial from the start. Democratic lawmakers have long accused her of bending the Justice Department to serve Trump's interests, selectively targeting critics while protecting allies. Until now, those accusations lived mostly in the realm of politics. What changed everything was the emergence of documented constitutional violations backed by her own admissions. That shift explains the growing bipartisan outrage. Conservative constitutional scholars who typically favor expansive executive authority have publicly stated that Bondi crossed a line. When defenders of executive power refuse to defend the executive, the signal is unmistakable. Court filings do not care about party loyalty. They preserve facts in permanent form. Bondi's admissions now exist as part of the official record. Prosecutors do not need to speculate. They can simply point to her own words and actions. This puts Bondi at a crossroads with no easy exits. Prosecutors have several paths forward. They could decline to bring charges, citing political sensitivities, though that becomes increasingly difficult given the strength of the evidence. They could pursue charges and offer a plea deal in exchange for cooperation, or they could seek a full indictment and let a jury decide her fate. If a plea deal is offered, it would likely require Bondi to testify against others. The pressure to cooperate would be immense. Life in prison is a powerful motivator. Cooperation could mean the difference between decades behind bars and a reduced sentence. If she chooses to fight, the risks multiply. Juries tend to react harshly to government officials who abuse their power. Judges tend to impose harsher sentences after trial than after negotiated ati. The gamble is enormous. There's also the broader implication for the rule of law. Prosecuting a former or sitting attorney general for constitutional violations would send a clear message that no office grants immunity. It would reinforce the idea that the Constitution is not optional, even for those entrusted to enforce it. At the same time, the political fallout would be explosive. Supporters would frame prosecution as persecution. Critics would frame restraint as complicity. That tension guarantees that whatever happens next will reshape public trust in the justice system. One thing is already clear. Pam Bondi's own actions placed her in this position. The attempt to retroactively legitimize unconstitutional prosecutions transformed political controversy into criminal exposure. The documents exist. The admissions are on record. The consequences are no longer hypothetical. This story is still unfolding. Prosecutors are reviewing evidence, legal teams are calculating risks. The decisions made in the coming months will determine whether this ends as a cautionary tale or a historic prosecution. What happens next will matter far beyond Pam Bondi. It will define how accountability works at the highest levels of power and whether constitutional limits still mean what they say. If you want to stay ahead of this story as it develops, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and share it so others understand what is truly at stake. Drop your thoughts in the comments and stay locked in because this legal storm is only plus read.